Last week we talked about marriage, and I basically gave 10 bits of what I take to be wisdom under number 1, how to find the right one, number 2, how to remain happily married, and then the goal was to try and get through 10 bits of wisdom, biblically informed wisdom, I should say, on parenting. But we only got through 2/3 of the presentation, so what we're going to do today is we're going to spend the first probably about 15 to 20 minutes talking about parenting, and then we're going to transition into how to live a long, happy, and healthy life. So marriage, as we noted last week, is the most important of all human relationships, and the reason is obvious. Marriage is the relationship that gives rise to every other relationship, right? Marriage, the coming together of a man and a woman, a husband and his wife, is the procreative relationship that creates little human beings, and then those human beings become fathers and sisters and dads and cousins and uncles and nephews and church members and friends and neighbors. When we transition now to talk about the outgrowth of not all, but most marriages is children. Children, right? We have children. And so we're going to talk about what is God's intention, and is there any biblically informed wisdom when it comes to parenting? And the answer is yes. I want to start by saying something here that's really radical, and for me, this is the sort of cornerstone of everything else that I'm going to say about parenting after this, the 10 points that will follow. And that is that as Christian parents, we are not called to merely raise our children, right? We are called to disciple our children. Right? Now, I just need you to, it is not the job of Tweed Valley Adventist College or Gold Coast Christian College or any school to disciple your children. They're going to do their best. Blair and Marty and the administrators and the staff, they're going to do their best to try and disciple. But what they're doing is augmenting, what they're doing is enhancing and magnifying the discipleship that's already taking place in the home. Right now, of course, a high percentage of people that go to some of our Adventist schools are not always Adventists. They don't even come from any Christian background at all. But for those that do, Christian parents need to feel the responsibility. They need to feel the what? Not just of providing, not just of teaching, not just of feeding, not just of clothing, but of discipling. You are called as a minister of the gospel. If you're a father, you're a minister of the gospel. If you're a mother, you're a minister of the gospel. Even if you're an older brother or an older sister, you are a minister of the gospel to raise and to disciple your children or your younger brother or sister. Now, I want to say something about that. One of the things that I have seen, not just in this local church, but all over the world where I've traveled, parents sometimes find it difficult to disciple their children and to call their children to a high and godly standard because they know they themselves failed in various capacities as teenagers and as young people. And so what happens is because they have failed, they feel that they've lost the moral leverage or the moral ground on which they can then advise their children differently than they may have behaved. And so I want to say this. Yes, as parents, you may have made some seriously bad mistakes. But the call is to teach out of those mistakes, right? If you have made mistakes, then use these as opportunities, teachable moments to disciple your children. And so I want to talk about Parenting 101. And I want to start with number 1. It's this idea that there really is no such thing as quality time. Now, that might sound a little strange to you, especially since we've already talked about the keeping of the Sabbath in this very series, how to keep the Sabbath holy. What do you mean, Pastor Asscherick, when you say the first thing when it comes to parenting that there's really no such thing as quality time? Years ago, I read an article titled The Myth of Quality Time. And the idea was that when it comes to children, a child does not care if you are on a Mediterranean cruise or a Caribbean cruise or some, tour of the Middle East or Europe or whatever, or you're playing catch in the backyard. Right? For a child, when it comes to the raising of children and the discipling of children, it's not those special moments, those holidays that you spend lots of money on. Those are important, don't get me wrong. They're fine to do those things, but it's the volume of time. Just the sheer amount of time that you spend with your kids, which segues into number 2. One of the things that I've heard over and over again, and I'm sure that Blair and Marty and others have heard this, is you get parents that come to you and say, oh, my 15-year-old son, my 16-year-old daughter is off the rails. What do I do? Now, this is not always the case. I want to be clear. These are generalizations, but it is often the case that when parents suddenly see the red flags, they missed the yellow flags in the early teens and even the preteen years. And I want to say this. As a parent, you put money in the bank from ages 0 to 12 so that money is there to take out, to withdraw in the ages of 13 and beyond. right? So you're thinking about those troublesome teen years. It's very difficult to try and quickly, and I've met many fathers and many mothers that have tried to like become super dad when their child's 15 or 16 and starting to go off the rails, starting to steer toward independence. Well, you weren't there as you could have been and should have been with volume of time when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now you want to come to the rescue as super parent when your 16-year-old child or your 17-year-old child says, Dad, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and Mom, I'm over it. You have to put time in. There's a great quotation here from Jennifer Schwerzer. She says, bonding, parent-child bonding forms the foundation of mental and relational stability later on. If you want to have the ear of your teenage children, you have to get the investment, get the change in your pocket from ages 0 to 12. And it's not just those fancy vacations, and again, those are important, and you go on them insofar as you feel led to do or as you're able to do, but you've got to just invest. I want to say something here that might upset a few of you, but there's probably several things I'm going to say today that might upset a few of you. Probably 2 years ago, I had an interesting conversation with a member of this church who was basically talking about how hard they worked, and they're working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week. They're just working so hard. And saying, Pastor Asscherick, you know, I don't see you working 50 hours a week. I don't see you regularly working 60 hours a week. I said, okay, let's be clear about something. I am not regularly working 50 hours a week, and I very rarely work 60 hours a week. And I said, now let me tell you why that is. This right now is a season in my life. Life has its various seasons, and the season that I'm in right now is that I have 2 teenage boys. What do I have, everyone? 2 teenage boys, and I've looked up my contractual relationship with the North New South Wales Conference, who's my employer. And my contractual relationship with them is for a 40-hour work week. Now, there are going to be weeks where I work 45 hours, and there's going to be the occasional week where I work 50 hours. But this right now is not a season in my life where you should have the expectation that your pastor with 2 teenage children is going to be working 60 hours a week to save the church, and then his 2 teenage children feel like he was busy saving everybody else, busy ministering to everybody else, busy loving everybody else, and had no time for them. This is not that season in my life. Now, my sons now are nearly 17 and 15, and in about 4 years' time, they'll be out of the home, and then you might see me doing 50 and 60-hour work weeks. There certainly were times where I was doing that with greater frequency before my children, my 2 sons, were in their late preteen and teenage years. So the thing I want to say for those of you that are I want to be careful here because I don't want to tread on the choices that you're making and the way that you're raising your children, but I just want to say this. You only get your children one time. And my strong advice to you is if you have to scale your lifestyle back, if you have to scale back that raise or that promotion or those overtime hours so that you get more time with your children, that's the season in your life, especially in those formative years, ages 0 to 12, where you're pouring into your children so that hopefully, if you've done it right, by the grace of God, your 14, 15, 16-year-old children want to spend time with you. You're not annoying. You might be a little annoying, but it's not just, oh, Dad, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and slamming doors, and I hate you, and all of these kinds of things. So you want to get to the place where in the natural formative development of teenagers, what's happening is that they're becoming aware of a larger reality. Dad doesn't know everything. Mom doesn't know everything. And so they're beginning to take more seriously the role of their peers and the evaluation of their peers. Nothing wrong with that. So here's a way to think about it. When your kids are young, when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10, 11, 12, the table of influence for a child that age is a small table. It has you and your spouse and the brothers and sisters and maybe an occasional friend. And then they're there. So maybe you have a table of 6 people, right, depending on the size of your family. But here's what happens. As soon as your children get to be 13, 14, 15, 16, all of a sudden you notice that the table's bigger and there's other people sitting at the table. There's now 16-year-olds at the table and 15-year-olds at the table, and now you're one voice at the table. Now, here's the goal. I'll just give it to you very simple. Your goal as a parent of teenagers is to keep your seat at the table. It's unrealistic to think that you're going to keep that table as the same size. What I mean by this is the table of influence. It's unrealistic to think that when your child is 16 or 17, in fact, it wouldn't even be developmentally or socially healthy for the child's circle of influence to continue to be that small. No, you don't want only 5 or 6 people at the table. You want there to be 20 people at the table, of whom are mom and dad and brothers and sisters, and maybe even if you're blessed, grandparents as well. So the goal for a Christian parent is to be one of the voices at the table. To be there. Well, how are you going to be there? You've got to be invited to the teenager's table. And there's many a parent that have figured out you can't force yourself into the inner circle of influence in a teenager's life. You just can't. You win yourself, you ingratiate yourself into that teenager circle of influence in ages 0 to 12. You've got to put money in the bank from 0 to 12 if you have any hope or any desire to withdraw that money later. Number 3, very important, it's straight out of the gospel, straight out of Scripture. Speak faith, hope, and belief into your children. But also be realistic. Do not breed narcissism, right? Not just general things about how you're the greatest, you're the best, you're the prettiest, you're the smartest. That's not what we're talking about here. Don't breed narcissism. Rather emphasize service and usefulness, not so-called worldly greatness. Speaking faith, speaking belief, speaking hope into your children is absolutely beautiful. We've already seen this in the very first installment of this series. Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, the Apostle Paul says, you've been called to liberty, you've been called to be free, but use your freedom for service. Use your freedom for what, everyone? Service. And the Apostle Peter says the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 16. Live as people who are free, but do not misuse your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. So when you're speaking faith, when you're speaking hope, when you're speaking belief and confidence into your children, you're not building them up some unrealistic, ridiculous portrait of themselves. So what you effectively are doing is creating a narcissist. No, you're preparing them for usefulness and for service to the larger world. Believe in them in that capacity. Number 4, never ever let them question your love. Can somebody say amen to that? You can be disappointed, you can be annoyed, you can even be angry, all of those are totally appropriate emotions for a parent at certain situations in the raising of a child, but never, ever, ever create a situation or a culture or a context where your child could legitimately or justifiably question your love for them. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have to tell your children over and over and over and over again that you love them. It breaks my heart. I get people in my office, they say things like, my dad never told me he loved me. I didn't hear I love you from my parents. That just wasn't something. I'm just pleading with you if you have young children. Even if they're already 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and you haven't really been doing it much up to this point, just start occasionally, at least episodically, and I'm encouraging you to do it regularly. Just say the words, I love you. I love you. I love you. A day would not go by that Landon and Jabel would not hear from my mouth that I love them half a dozen times between, every day. And hallelujah, Landon's in this really cool phase right now, and Jabel to some degree as well, where almost every phone conversation or every interaction that I have with my oldest son, Landon, who's almost 17, ends with, love you, Dad. Love you, Dad. Well, why? Why is he doing it? Because I've modeled for him that you say you love. You don't just love and keep quiet. You say it. And I know that some of you aren't as extroverted as me. Some of you aren't as, talkative as me. But you can say the words, I love you. 3 simple syllables. Right? You don't have to be loquacious. You can just say, son, I love you. And many of you that have young children, many of you that have teenage children in this very church, you'll know that I regularly come to the parents in this church of teens, and I say, I love your son. I love your daughter. I'm proud of your son. I'm proud of your daughter. You know that I do this. Right? What I'm trying to do there as a pastor is model for you that you should be speaking love, speaking affirmation, and speaking affection into the lives of your children. Number 5. Punishment is totally a legitimate thing, but it should be consequential and compassionate like God's. When it is time for punishment to come, the punishment should flow from the violation, from whatever the thing is. And if you've done it right, and it's not easy to do, don't get me wrong, this is an area that was not I didn't hit this one out of the park. I didn't hit this for a 6 or even a 4. Violetta and I wrestled because we had slightly different philosophies of punishment early on. And it took us a little bit to get our ducks in a row. But if you line it up and you get it right, you should get to the place where your son or your daughter is absolutely convinced that you're not doing something to them so much as you are giving them over to the consequence of a choice that they themselves have made. It's key. Number 6, speak to your children about relationships and sex More than just the old birds and the bees talk. That might have worked in the past. That might have worked in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whenever you grew up. But I got news for you. Today is an entirely different situation. And in case you're unclear about this, if you have teenage children or young children, here's what you need to do. Required to do, right? If you want to keep your parenting card, you need to do this. You need to discuss modesty, dating, pornography, sexting, masturbation, premarital sex, and the list goes on. That's the world you live in. We don't live in a world where we can just pretend, especially in light of the fact that many of our children have smartphones, right? So-called smartphones. And we call them phones, but they're not phones. It's actually, we're doing ourselves a disservice when we say, I got my daughter a phone. I got my son a phone. If you got them a flip phone, a Nokia flip phone that they can just go beep, 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 you got them a phone. If you got them an iPhone or a Samsung, whatever those are called, you didn't get them a phone, you got them a computer. Okay, now you're welcome to do that. As a parent, you are full well within your parental freedom and liberty to buy your 15, 16, 17-year-old son an iPhone. You can do that. But I'm assuming as a pastor that if I see your teenage, especially young teens, Lord have mercy, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, if they have an iPhone, I'm assuming that you aren't just yourself assuming that everything will be fine and they'll navigate the way forward on their own. You've had I don't want to say conversation, you've had the conversations and you continue to have the conversations, because the truth of the matter is that an iPhone or a similarly fashioned smartphone is a portal to filth. It's a portal to filth that many of you can scarcely imagine, right? If you're over the age of about 40, you don't even know what a lot of these kids are doing. What the new normal for these kids is off the hook. And I could tell you stories that would just make your hair fall. It would just hurt your soul. It hurts my soul. So take internet access in the home. I just want to say this. I've said it before. I've said it to a few parents. I'll say it anyway. If you have a home where you have young children and they have unmonitored, uninterrupted access to the internet, you are delinquent in your parenting responsibilities. That you're just delinquent in your responsibilities. Doesn't mean you're not a good parent. You might be a good parent in other areas. But you have to monitor. You just have to assume the worst. Not because your children can't be trusted. I trust my children. I don't trust the internet. I trust my children. I don't trust all of the points of access, because if one in the group begins to look at something and then they get sort of fingered by Facebook, I mean, the algorithms by which things are fed to us. I mean, I get stuff on my own as a 45-year-old man who's not looking at that kind of stuff. I get stuff fed into my feed, whether through Facebook or pop-ups or emails. It just happens. So you have to be having that conversation. The conversation about premarital sex, the conversation about pornography, the conversation about masturbation, because the new normal is not the normal that you grew up with if you're 40 years old or older. That's gonzo. Number 7, give them room to make mistakes, but still parent. Balance here is crucial. This is one of the big things that we talked about in our opening series there, where God gave Adam and Eve freedom. They were free to make morally significant choices. I want my children making mistakes while they still live in my home. I want them to have enough freedom, enough room to roam, that when they make a mistake, they still live in my home. They still live with me, so that we can coach them through those decisions and I can work with them, etc., and create an environment in which it's okay to make a mistake. Too often we see Christian parents that seek to almost isolate their children from temptation, isolate their children from the world. And I want to say this. As a Christian parent, your goal should be to insulate but not isolate. You can insulate from the world, you can insulate from sensuality, you can insulate from all of those things, but if you isolate your children from it, the moment they turn 18, 19 and leave the home, it's just like a rubber band that's been pulled back for years, and as soon as they're out of the home, the rubber band lets go, and they're gone. I want my children, my 2 sons, making some of those mistakes that a lot of kids don't even get to make until they're 18, 19, 20. I want them making those mistakes in my home when they're 14, 15, and 16. But the only way to create an atmosphere in which those mistakes can be made is to give freedom to make mistakes. A word on that. I'm really passionate about this, and I hope I get the support of my teachers, and I might upset a few parents, so I apologize in advance if I upset you. I am absolutely committed to standing by the decisions that are made, especially in terms of discipline, from my parents or from my children's teachers. Okay? I think it's a very unsafe, unhealthy, and unwise decision if your child has been disciplined by a teacher to undermine the teacher, even if you don't agree with what the teacher did. You can have that conversation with the teacher between you and them, but you do yourself a disservice and you do your children a disservice to tell your children that the teacher made a big mistake or the teacher misread the situation or whatever. I said to my boys, I said, boys, let's make this very clear. If you get a detention, that's the first part of your punishment. Okay, if you get a detention, that's the first part of your punishment. The second part of your punishment comes when you get home. And I'll never forget, Landon got his first detention. It was probably grade 9 or grade 8. I don't even remember the details. But he got his punishment, and he came home. He's like, oh, and Cece wouldn't mind me saying this to you. It was Miss Kong. He comes home, oh, Dad, I got a detention today, and Miss Kong was this, and Miss Kong, she didn't get it right, and she misunderstood, and she whatever. And he made his case, and for those of you that know Landon, he can be exceedingly persuasive. So I heard him out, and I said, okay, let me call Cece. So I called up Cece Kong, and the first thing I said to Miss Kong, I said, Cece, I want to just say this right up front. I support you 100%. I'm going to stand beside you. Now, just can you explain to me what happened? And I found her explanation completely reasonable. I have trust, I have confidence in the teachers of my children. If I didn't, why are my kids in that school? So what you do is you actually create a distrust of authority, and you create a kind of narcissistic exceptionalism when it's you and your child versus the mean old teachers or the unfair administration or whatever. You're just doing yourselves a disservice. Even if you think the administration is wrong, even if you think the teacher is wrong, let that be between you and them. Don't drag your children into it, because one of the most difficult things to teach a child, anybody, is respect for authority. Respect for authority, and you've got to do that. Number 8, this was a challenge for me, I'll be really honest with you. Nobody in my family, Violetta, myself, Landon, or Jabel, does this well. I say this with humility, I probably do this the best in our family, and I'm terrible at it, okay? And that's number 8 here. Learn to say these words as a parent. I was wrong, I made a mistake, I could have done better, I'm sorry. Those are not easy words to say, okay? But I tell you what, you think that if you admitted you were wrong, or if you admitted you made a mistake, or if you admitted that you could have done better, that this will actually undermine your parental influence. It will increase your parental influence. I have seen over the years that as I've begun to learn how to be able to say this, hey, Landon, sorry, I was a bit over the top there. Jabel, sorry, I misread that situation. I thought that you said you weren't going to vacuum the house. I'm sorry, I just misheard. I'm sorry, I misread that. I could have done better. It creates a culture in which now Landon can start saying to Jabel, and Jabel to Landon, and Jabel and Landon to Mom, and Mom to Jabel and Landon. We create an atmosphere in which it's okay to be wrong. But it's only okay to be wrong if you admit that you were wrong, and you do so in a culture of acceptance and in a culture of positivity. Someone once said that bad decisions make good stories. That's true. But they also make for teachable moments. If a mistake has been made, if your child has blown it, and you know, I have 2 amazing sons. Many of you know my sons. But they have not made it through their teenage years scot-free. They have made some decisions that pain me in my heart, and they have said some things and done some things that I thought, you know, I thought based on the training that I've done and based on the discipleship that I've done and based on the education that I've done and the loving that I've done, I thought you wouldn't have made that choice, but you did make that choice. Okay, but those become opportunities for teachable moments, and I'll be honest with you. One of the things that has been really helpful for me when my children have done something that I regard as disappointing is I've decided that 50% of all of those bad decisions they've made at least belong to me. If I take ownership for at least 50% of the bad decisions that my children have made, it helps me to treat them with more grace and with more love, because the truth of the matter is that when I look at some of the areas where Landon or Jabel, and they're great kids, but where they've made some decisions that I wish they hadn't, I can look back and think, you know, David, you could have done better there. You have to wear some of that mistake. You have to wear some of that falling short in that particular area. Teachable moments. Okay, 2 more. Number 9, read the Bible with your children, pray with your children, and talk to them about their life. It's amazing how few Christian homes this happens in. I'm sad to report to you that I believe the majority of Seventh-day Adventist homes with children are not having family worship. I believe that. I think that's probably true in this local church. I think it's true in most Seventh-day Adventist churches. Even if you don't have a formal worship where you gather together and you get out the guitar and you play and you sing, you don't have to do that. But don't let a day go by, even if you've not been doing it up to this point. Do not let another day go by where you don't pray with your children at some point. My boys are prayed with numerous times a day. They're prayed with before they leave to go to school. They're prayed with individually. Each of them, when we go to bed at night, we pray at every meal. And then if a situation comes up, I get a phone call or we learn about something. Hey, boys, let's pray. Let's gather and pray right now. Reading the Bible is crucially important too. Don't get me wrong. I love these devotional books that are produced by Review and Herald and Pacific. Fine. Read the Bible. Read the Bible. We've just finished reading, or in the middle of reading, a book right now with Jabel called Chiseled, right? A guide to godliness and young manhood. Nothing wrong with those kinds of books, but also be reading the text, because there's power in the Word. There's power in the Bible. Read the Bible with your children. It doesn't have to be some big, long exercise. Just gather your children together and read a psalm before they run out the door to go to school. You're not too busy to read the Bible with your children. Prioritize it. And finally, number 10, have truckloads of fun together. That's you. That's for you, Mel. Have truckloads of fun together. Say yes whenever you reasonably can. Remember, the family that plays together, what do? Stays together. The family that, and you know, one of the things that I never let my children say, they were a very young age, I do not allow my children to say they're bored. Okay, and I advise you, don't let your children say they're bored. When my boys used to say, Dad, I'm bored, I would say, that's because you're a boring person. Because life is anything but boring, okay? And this is just a short list here. Here's just a few things that you can get involved in with your children if you're not already playing together, doing activities together, doing stuff together. And again, if you have teenage children, teenage daughters or sons, this is not the time in your life to be working 50 and 60-hour weeks. It's just not. This is the time to be pouring into your children and doing some of these things: hiking, rock climbing, cycling, mountain biking, BMX, bird watching, photography, geocaching, off-roading, mechanics, vehicle restoration, model aircraft, running, basketball, touch football, snorkeling, spearfishing, scuba diving, bouldering, stand-up paddleboarding, kayaking, woodworking, skateboarding, wakeboarding, gymnastics, tennis, table tennis, fishing, hunting, shooting, skiing, swimming, weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, golfing, jiu-jitsu, squash, beekeeping, exploring, canyoning, gardening, horse riding, kite surfing, and archery. Okay, I'm sure you can find something on there that you could enjoy and your daughter could enjoy or your son could enjoy. And everything on that list is better than video games. Everything on that list is better than video games. One of the great decisions that Violetta and I made was we said absolutely no to all video games, right? And a few little Pong-like games on their iPad that they played occasionally, but there's no Xbox in our home. I don't even know the names of these things. PlayStation, is that the other one, or are those the same thing? We don't let that in our home. Now, if you do have it in your home, I'm not judging. What I'm saying is that I want you to understand something. There are people who have their PhDs in human neuropsychology and neurology who are hired by gaming companies with the express purpose to make games as addictive as possible. There are people who get their PhDs in neurochemistry and neurobiology, and their job is to make games addictive. Right? To make games addictive. So just be aware that if you bring something into your home, you are bringing something into your home that has countless thousands and tens of thousands of hours put into it, designedly to make it addictive. Now, I will say this. If the games that are being played, whether on a computer or an Xbox or a PlayStation or whatever, are violent games or shooting games, that's just completely unacceptable. In a Christian home, for Christian parents to allow their children to play those games. And I tell you, I get a kick out of it when I have parents will come to me and they'll say, well, what am I supposed to do? My child's 15. My child's 16. And I never quite know what to say to that. Just repeat yourself again. What am I supposed to do? Your child is 15 or 16. Would you like a list? I can give you a list of how, if a 15-year-old lives in your home and eats your food and resides under your roof, you can do something about it. You are not powerless. And the truth of the matter is that if you've created a power dynamic in your home where you feel powerless to influence your teenage children, that didn't happen at 15 and 16 and 17. It happened at 4, 5, and 6. So I'm pleading with you, get outdoors, do activity, whatever. I don't care what it is. Do something so that video games become less and less interesting. Christian parents, you are not called to just raise your children, but to disciple them. Can somebody say amen? You're called to disciple your children. These are just 10 bits of what I take to be wisdom. You do not have to be perfect as a Christian parent. Your children already know you're not. Can somebody say amen? They already know you're not perfect, but your children should know that you're a follower of Jesus. Your children should know that you're a follower of Jesus. We're going to transition now to the fourth installment in our series, which is how to live a long, happy, and healthy life. We've already noted this quotation from New Testament scholar N.T. Wright, in which he says, God as the creator is glorified when creation is, what's our word? Does anybody remember one of the F words? We had the word free, and we had the word functional, and we had the word fallible, and we had the word flourish. God, the creator, is glorified when creation is flourishing and able to praise him gladly and freely. Creation is designed to flourish under wise human stewardship, reflecting the love of the Creator. We see so many passages in which God exhorts and admonishes and wishes for us to flourish, to prosper, and to be in health. Passages like 3 John chapter 1, verse 2, Beloved, I pray that you may prosper. You could just as easily insert the word flourish. I pray that you're doing well. I pray that you're prospering and in all things in your life, financially, spiritually, emotionally, maritally, in terms of parenting, and be in health. Be in health. Jeremiah chapter 33, verses 6 and 7. Behold, I will bring this city health and healing. I'm going to bring health and healing to this city. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 7 to 10. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 20 to 22. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to all their flesh. Deuteronomy chapter 7, given from Moses, the second book of the law, it says, Then it shall come to pass because you listen to these judgments and keep to do them. The word, this is why it's important that you're reading the Bible with your kids. Moses actually expressly commanded the Israelites in Deuteronomy chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. Read the Bible to your children. Tell them the great and amazing things that God has done for his people. You're under obligation, solemn, responsible obligation to do this with your children. Moses says, it shall come to pass because you listen to these judgments and you keep and do them. The Lord your God will keep with you the covenant of mercy which he swore to your fathers. He will love you and bless you and multiply you. He will bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land, the increase of your cattle, the offspring of your flock in the land which he swore to your fathers to give you. You will be blessed above all peoples. There will not be a male or a female barren among you or your livestock. The Lord will take away from you all the sickness and will afflict you with none of the terrible diseases of Egypt. God's desire for Israel was health. His desire for all of his children is happiness, health, flourishing, and fruitfulness. Be fruitful and multiply. That's God's desire for us. Our modern word health comes from the Old English word health. Right? There's this Germanic English coming together of these words health. What does that sound like? It sounds like the word whole. The word health means to be whole. No wonder we turn to numerous passages in the New Testament where we see this word whole used as a synonym for health. He said to the man, stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other, as healthy as the other. Matthew chapter 15, verse 31. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, and the maimed made whole, healthy. Acts chapter 4, verse 10, let it be known to you, this is Peter speaking, and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man stands before you whole. The word healthy means whole. And all throughout the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when we see Jesus healing people, restoring people, bringing them to wholeness, these are echoes of Eden. This is the Creator reestablishing the created order of being fruitful and multiplying. Now, I've purposely dropped in just a few slides from our last series, The Beautiful, Believable Basics. And just very quickly, in 60 seconds or less, I want to remind you that there's these two massively impacting factors in the history of the church. And that's the de-Judaization and the Hellenization of the faith. That is to say, the un-Jewishing of the Christian church and the Greeking of the Christian church. And we talked about many of the casualties that occurred there. This is a slide directly from that series. We mentioned the Greek dualistic view of human nature has distorted salvation, heaven, and hell. The Greek said there's a body, it's made of matter, and there's a spirit, it's immaterial, and these are two things. This is called anthropological dualism, as opposed to what the Jews believed, anthropological monism, that mankind was fundamentally unified. The Greeks said, no, there's a duality. Not only does this distort salvation, heaven, and hell, it distorts salvation, heaven, and health. I want to talk about that. Clark Pinnock, this is a quotation from that series, anthropological dualism has done serious harm in weakening our blessed hope of Christ's appearing and in distorting our understanding of the world to come. We talked about that. It has also fostered many false dichotomies, including a negative view of the body in contrast with the soul, and a concept of salvation as interior experience rather than total transformation. Right? This is where we get phrases like this from. He's so heavenly minded that he's what? No earthly good, because these two are different venues, they're different domains, they're different realms, and they don't intersect. I'm going to suggest to you today that if you want to be healthy spiritually, if you want to be healthy maritally, if you want to be healthy emotionally, you need to be healthy physically, because you are one whole person. Health. God doesn't just care about your soul. He doesn't just care that you get your mouth to say spiritual things or even your brain to believe spiritual things. He cares about you, and you are a body and a spirit put together in a whole human being. So far, so good. Luke chapter 2, verse 52, speaking of the development of Jesus himself, it says that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature with favor in God and men. Notice the various areas that Luke identifies. He grew in wisdom, in stature, in favor with God, and in favor with men. That is to say that Jesus grew as a whole person. He grew intellectually, he grew physically, he grew spiritually, and he grew socially. If you meet someone who has amazing biceps and six-pack abs, but all of his or her relationships are broken, they're not a healthy person. If you meet someone who is a cardiovascular monster but doesn't have a relationship with God, they're not a healthy person. They're a partial person. So I want to talk to you about how to live to be 100. How to live to be 100. First of all, you have to exercise. Number one, exercise. Your body is designed to move, sweat, and be strong. So move, sweat, and be strong no matter how old you are. Exercise, exercise, exercise. We talked in the first sermon in this series about how Adam and Eve were given not just a job, a menial task, they were given a vocare, a vocation, and that vocation was to tend and to keep the garden, and it required their physical body. It required them to move and to work and to get strong, and the way that the body is designed is that when the body is stressed, when you put the body under physiological and physical trauma, it gets stronger and fitter and better. So number one, you want to live to be 100, exercise. This is a book that you should read. I recommend this book all over the world. It was published in 2013, written by John Ratey, who is the director of the clinical psychiatry department at Harvard University. This book is worth its weight in gold because it puts you on the cutting edge of the latest neurological research. We're talking research that's taken place in the last 5 to 7 years. So if you think, oh, no, I know all of that. No, you don't. No, you don't. This is stuff that's brand new, fresh, the revolutionary new science of exercise and the brain. John Ratey says in the book, in today's technology-driven world, it's easy to forget that we are born movers. Because we've engineered movement right out of our lives, our culture treats the mind and body as if they are two separate entities. Dualism. He says, I want to reconnect the two. The real reason we feel so good when we get our blood pumping is that it makes the brain function at its best. And in my view, the benefit of this physical activity is far more important and fascinating than what it does for the body. Building muscles and conditioning the heart and lungs, I love this. He says that's essentially a side effect. It's not just to get big biceps and strong core and a ripped ab. He said that's a byproduct. The number one reason you exercise, he says, I often tell my patients that the point of exercise is to build and condition the what? The brain. Your brain is an organ. It's the most important organ in your body. What neuroscientists have discovered in the past 5 years alone paints a riveting picture of the biological relationship between the body, the brain, and the mind. To keep our brains at peak performance, our bodies need to work. What's the last word there? You got to work hard. Let me just give it to you straight. You need to sweat and raise your heart rate for at least 30 minutes, at least 3 to 5 times a week. If you want your body and your brain to be functioning optimally, you have to get sweaty exercise. Sweaty exercise. You also need to stay strong, which is the other end of the spectrum. You have cardiovascular exercise, then you have strength training. You have to be strong. Being strong is your ticket to late age freedom and mobility. You get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's not going to be the cardiovascular strength that carries you to freedom and independence. It'll be the physical strength that you have in your muscles. You need to stay strong. This is particularly important as you age to 40 and beyond. Take a look at this. That right there is a cross-section of the thigh of a 40-year-old professional triathlete. Okay, so you've just cut right across the thigh, right? You just bifurcated the thigh right through there, and you're looking down. So what you see is the bone in the middle. It looks like a steak, doesn't it? You're looking at a bone. We're going to talk about that in just a second. You've got a whole lot of muscle and then a thin layer of subcutaneous tissue, right? Now look at this. This is the leg of a sedentary 74-year-old man. Okay? So all of that white stuff around there is adipose tissue. All of that is fat, and that spindly, weak, gnarly-looking stuff in the middle is muscle. But I want you to see the last one. That is the leg of a 74-year-old triathlete. Now take a look at the leg of the 74-year-old triathlete and the 40-year-old professional triathlete, and they are virtually indistinguishable. You can stay strong, you can stay fit well into your 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. This is an amazing report that was just released in 2012 from Science Daily. Senior runners keep improving. Summary of the research. Researchers have analyzed changes in participation and performance of runners aged 20 to 80 in the New York City Marathon over the last 30 years. They've been analyzing the ages that the times that older runners are running. Notice what they've learned. The results are largely unexpected. Why? What happened? What was so unexpected? The best male marathon runners over 65 and the best female marathon runners over 45 have consistently improved their performance over the last 30 years. Every other age stays the same. Statistically, they've been studying this for 30 years now. Every age has stayed roughly the same, but older athletes have improved their time on average every single year. The improved performances can be explained, number one, by the increased number of participants in these age categories. Number two, as well as the increased interest in this age population has in terms of the benefits of physical activity on health and well-being, says Romuald Lepers, whose research into motor function plasticity during the aging is part of the overall research. For the researchers, this initial data on athletes over 40 combined with new physiology and sociology data will lead to improved understanding of the role that physical exercise has in aging well. You've got to exercise. If exercise was a pill, it would be the single greatest drug ever invented. Back to John Rady. Neuroscientists have just begun. This is fresh, cutting-edge research studying exercise's impact within brain cells, at the genes themselves. Even there, in the roots of our biology, they've found signs of the body's influence on the mind. It turns out that just moving our muscles produces proteins that travel through the bloodstream and into the brain, where they play pivotal roles in the mechanisms of our highest thought processes. They bear names such as insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1, and vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF, and they provide an unprecedented view of the mind-body connection. It's only in the past few years that neuroscientists have begun to describe these factors and how they work. And each new discovery adds awe-inspiring depth to the picture. If exercise came in pill form, says Dr. Rady, it would be plastered across the front page, hailed as the blockbuster drug of the century. Why? In October of 2000, researchers from Duke University made the New York Times with a study showing that exercise is better than sertraline or Zoloft at treating depression. Final paragraph here from Rady. I want to cement the idea that exercise has a profound impact on cognitive abilities and mental health. It is simply one of the best treatments we have for most psychiatric problems. So Rady says, yeah, if you exercise and you lift weights and you stay fit cardiovascularly, that's good for your arms, it's good for your legs, it's good for your lungs, but it's best for your brain. It's best for your brain. And there's even recent studies that show that physical, vigorous exercise offsets the onset of Alzheimer's, dementia, and other age-related issues. Now look at this. One of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a woman by the name of Ellen White, I just put her lifespan up here, 1827 to 1915, wrote in the book Education in 1903. 1903, one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and a health reformer par excellence. Notice what she said. Now remember, I noted several times there where Rady says, the most recent research in the last 5 years, and notice what she says, the whole body is designed for, what's the word? Action, and unless the physical powers are kept in healthy, active exercise, the mental powers cannot long be used to their highest capacity. 1903, and here a book is released in 2013 saying in the last 5 years, we now know that the number one reason you exercise is so that you can keep your brain healthy. All that other stuff is simply a byproduct. Number two, you've got to eat like Eden. This involves, but is not limited to, being a vegetarian or, better yet, a vegan. How do we know that? Well, because right in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, this series is titled Eden Every Day. It says, and God said, see, look, Adam, Eve, I have given you every herb, every plant that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food. The translation is, you eat fruit. You are a fruitarian. After the fall, after Genesis chapter 3, God gave them permission to also eat vegetables. Notice this, Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. So before the fall, Adam and Eve were fruitarians strictly, and after the fall, they were still strict vegetarians, eating fruits and vegetables. The largest nutritional study ever conducted in the history of nutritional science is called the China Study. The China Study, it was a book that was published several years ago based on research from the 1970s and 1980s that T. Colin Campbell and his amazing team from Cornell did. And it's absolutely, how many people here have read the China Study? It's a mind-meltingly good book. I mean, just absolutely amazing. And if you don't want to read all like 600 pages of it, I'll give you some of the major highlight takeaways. Number one, animal protein promotes cancer growth. Number two, you should be more worried about poor nutrition than pesticides. Number three, heart disease can be reduced through diet. Number four, animal-based foods are not necessary. And number five, eat plants for optimal health. Amen. All of this is simply saying, eat like Eden. Eat like Eden. Eat like Eden. The Edenic streams, we've talked about these Edenic streams, these Edenic ideals, these Edenic institutions. Even if you don't believe in the God of Eden, if you live as if you were in the Garden of Eden, you are benefited. If you conduct your marital relation like the Garden of Eden, if you conduct your sexual life like the Garden of Eden, if you eat like the Garden of Eden, if you keep Sabbath like the Garden of Eden, even if you said, I'm an atheist and I don't believe any of that stuff, if you lived this way, you're benefited. How much more so for those of us that do believe in the God of the Garden of Eden and who want to not only live longer, happier, healthier lives, but we want to live God-glorifying lives. And modern research is bearing out this very point. In his excellent book titled In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan, excellent book, highly recommended. I agree with about 95% of what Michael Pollan says. He's not a strict vegetarian, but he's mostly vegetarian. And the great point that Michael Pollan makes, and I want to say this for those of you out there that are vegetarian but you're not healthy, being healthy is more about what you are eating and less about what you aren't eating. It's not what's not on your plate that keeps you healthy. It's what is on your plate that keeps you healthy. I meet people who are vegan and vegetarian who still are not healthy because the food they're eating is not healthful, nutritionally dense food. In the book, In Defense of Food, Michael Pollan summarizes the entire book in 7 words. Is it 7 words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 words. He says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That sounds like the Garden of Eden. Very good. This will be the last one. I think, yeah, we'll roll over the remaining 10 points into our sermon next week, so I don't want to rush through any of this. Notice this. This is, again, Ellen White, one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and a health reformer par excellence. Notice what she says in a book titled Counsels on Diets and Foods. In order to know what are the best foods, we must study. What are we going to study? God's, say it with me if you would, God's original plan for man's diet. Well, where would we find God's original plan for man's diet? We'd find it in the Garden of Eden. He who created man and who understands his needs appointed Adam his food. Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. She continues, the effects of a flesh diet may not be immediately realized. Now, she's writing this back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, when it was not yet known even that smoking was bad for you or caused cancer. So the China Study is still 100 years future. And yet she had these insights. She had this perspicacity. She had, I would say, an inspiration to be aware of how to live a healthful life. The effect of a flesh diet may not be immediately realized, but this is no evidence that it is not harmful. Few can be made to believe that it is the meat that they have been eating that has poisoned their blood and caused their suffering. Many die of diseases wholly due to meat eating, while the real cause is not suspected by themselves or by others. There is no good reason, if you live in a country like Australia, or you live in a country like the United States of America, there is no good reason to eat meat. You're welcome to do that. You're inside of your Christian liberty. You're inside of your own native agency that you possess as a human being to eat meat. You eat what you want. I'm just saying there's no good reason to do it. Now, if you are an Inuit that lives, in the topmost, level there of the Arctic Circle up in northern Alaska or northern Scandinavia or the Kamchatka Peninsula or something, and you don't have a supermarket that you can just go down to and get, grapes from Chile and lettuce from America and almonds from South America and mangoes from, no. You go to a supermarket. If you go to a supermarket, there's just no need to eat meat. The only good reason you can give to eat meat, the only one, is that you like the taste of it. That's it. That's the beginning and the end, period, full stop. Okay? Because think of it this way. The cow eats the grass, the elephant eats the grass, right? These are big, strong creatures. When I choose not to eat a cow and I just eat the vegetables, I'm just cutting out the middleman. Right? Rather than having the cow eat the grass and I get the energy, because all the energy comes from the grass. All the energy comes ultimately from the sun through the photosynthetic process. Right? So all I do is I just cut the middleman out. I just get rid of the cow and I just go straight to the grass. And it's better for you. It's better for the environment. It's much better for the cow. Thank you, Ruth. Okay. Final point we're going to make here today, and then we'll wrap this one up. How to live. Actually, I'm just going to end on that. We'll do our first 2 out of 10 points. So number 1, you've got to exercise, right? And let me just give you a little piece of advice on if exercise doesn't come naturally to you. Here's a simple thing, okay? Just go down to the local store and get two weights, 2 dumbbells. Or you can get 4 if you want, whatever the appropriate weight is. If you're a woman, it might be, say, 2 or 3 kilograms, a slight woman, or if you're a stronger man, maybe it's a 10-kilogram weight. Get 2 dumbbells, okay? You can get 4 if you want, or 6 if you want, a whole set, but just get 2. This is a simple trick. Put them in your bathroom. Put them in your bathroom. So you got these 2 dumbbells, and you put them in your bathroom, right? You just slide them up under the sink, and here's what you do. You go, and I'll give you the exercises that you do. They're really simple. You just do butterflies. You'll do 3 sets of butterflies, 3 sets of presses like this, 3 sets of curls like this, 8 to 12 each. 8 to 12 each. These, if the weights aren't too heavy, squats like this with the weights in your hand, right? There's a number of exercises that you do, and you do it in 10 minutes before you hop in the shower. That's it. That's it. And you can, especially for ladies, because what happens is for a number of internal physiological factors, women become increasingly, they're prone to osteoporosis as they age. And the number one way to offset osteoporosis, as strange as it sounds, is to lift weights. Lift weights. You've got to do load-bearing exercise. If you're a man and you're over the age of 40, what happens is that you need to try and do things that increase your testosterone and your what's called HGH, your human growth hormone. And the only way to do that, in terms of a physical activity, you can inject it, but we're not talking about that, is you have to do exercise. You have to do load-bearing exercise. See, when you're 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old, even 18 years old, you have testosterone and human growth hormone coursing through your veins. Right? This is fat burning, fast metabolizing. You can eat garbage. You don't have to get good rest. And you look great. But once you turn 35, 40, 45, the hormones go down, and then a cascade of bad effects happens. It's like a vicious cycle of negativity. You lose testosterone, you lose human growth hormone, less and less of it. And then as soon as, especially men, start to get a layer of what's called visceral fat, when men start to get the classic belly around them, this is bad news. It's terrible bad news, because that layer of visceral fat actually starts to act like estrogen in the male body. Did you know that? It actually suppresses testosterone production and starts to act like estrogen in the male body, which is why you have the sort of classic example of the man boobs, right? The man begins to actually feminize, and but the good news is, and I'll give you a great trick next week. Next week when we come back, I'll talk to you about how you can get rid of that visceral fat. But just at the outset here, exercise, exercise, exercise. Even if you haven't exercised in years, do your brain a favor, do your body a favor, do your family a favor, do yourself a favor, and say, you know what? I'm going to get fit to the glory of God. I'm just going to get fit to the glory of God, not out of some duty, not out of some compulsion, but because God, and by the way, I think if you pray over exercise, you get double benefit. I think it's totally appropriate for you to say, God in heaven, I've let myself go a little bit, I've gotten out of shape, and I ask your forgiveness, and I'm going to start making a step. I'm going to start moving back toward being a strong, moving, active, actionable person. So I want you to please double the benefit of all this exercise. Please, Father, restore the years that the locusts have eaten, and I believe he'll do it. Even if you're in here, you're 70 or 80 years old, even if you're almost 101, if you're Agnes's age. And Agnes, I might get you up next week and ask you a few questions about being a centenarian. You can do some exercise, number one. Number two, I urge you to seriously consider, if you're not already, become a vegetarian, a healthy vegetarian. Defined not so much by what you're not eating, but by what you are eating. And please do your body a favor. Just stop. Stop going to KFC. Stop going to McDonald's. Just don't give these companies your money. They are preying upon you. This food has been shown to be as addictive as cigarettes. It's fast and edible, but it's not food. You can't even dignify a lot of the stuff that is being served in these places with the name food. No. Start taking your body seriously. Take the Edenic ideal seriously. Take the Edenic stream seriously and just say, you know what? It's better for the environment. It's better for the cow. It's better for the chicken, and oh man, I could spend a long time talking about the completely indefensible way in which mankind has exploited the animal kingdom. Now, some of you might be like, man, I just want the old sermons back. It's funny. People said, we make it more practical. We want practical. Make it really practical. And now you're going to be like, okay, talk to us more about ontology and theology and get out of my refrigerator. Get out of, stop talking about the Xbox and the refrigerator box. Just start, okay. You asked for it. You asked for it. And beloved, I'm telling you, I'm not perfect in every one of these areas, not even close. But there's the ideal and there's the actual. And the goal of this series is to get us closer to the ideal so that the actual becomes closer to God's Edenic ideal. Because at the end of the day, God's Edenic ideal is not bondage. It's not a yoke of slavery. It is a passport to health. It's a passport to pleasure. It's a passport to happiness. And it is a passport to freedom. Father in heaven,